David's return to Jerusalem. Now all the people were in a dispute throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "The king saved us from all our enemies, he delivered us from the hand of the Philistines, and now he fled from the land and his kingdom because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, died in battle. Now therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing back the king?" So King David sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, saying, "Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, Why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the words of all Israel have come to the king? You are my brethren, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the king into his house? And say to Amasa, Are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me and more also, if you are not permanent commander of the army instead of Job." The king swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah, as that of one man. And word was sent to the king, saying, "Return, you and all your servants." Then the king returned and came as far as the river Jordan. And the men of Judah came to Gilgal on their way to meet the king, to escort him across the river Jordan. David shows mercy to Shimei. And Shimei the son of Gera, a Benjamite who was from Bahurim, hastened and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. There were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, and Ziba the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him, and they went over the Jordan before the king. And they went through the ford, carrying the king's household, and the service of escorting the king was completed. And they did what he thought good. Now Shimei the son of Gera fell on his face before the king as he was crossing the river Jordan. And he said to the king, "Do not let my lord impute iniquity to me, or remember the wrong your servant did on the day when my lord the king left Jerusalem, so that the king should take it to heart. For I, your servant, know that I sinned. Therefore here I am, the first to come today of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king." But Abishai the son of Zeruiah spoke up and said, "Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" And David said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should be adversaries to me? Today shall any man be put to death today in Israel? For I do not know today whether I am king over Israel." And the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." For the king swore to him. David receives Mephibosheth. Now Mephibosheth the son of Jonathan the son of Saul came down to meet the king. And he had not cared for his feet, nor trimmed his nails or his mustache, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he returned in peace. So when he came to Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "My lord the king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said to him, I will saddle a donkey for myself so I may ride on it and go to the king, because your servant is lame. And he deceived your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is like an angel of God. Therefore do what is good in your eyes. For all my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king. Yet you set your servant among those who eat at your own table. Therefore what right do I still have to cry out any more to the king?" So the king said to him, "Why are you still speaking of your affairs? I said, you and Ziba divide the land." Then Mephibosheth said to the king, "No, let him take it all, since my Lord the king has come back in peace to his house. Notes from the previous page. 18:19-23 Ahimaaz wishes to run and tell David, but Job discourages him from bringing bad news to the king. Instead, he sends Hushai, the foreigner and friend of the king. Unable to restrain Ahimaaz further, Job relents and Ahimaaz outruns Hushai. 18:28-30 Ahimaaz tells the king only about the battle victory. 18:31-33 Hushai is left to tell the king of Absalom's death. 19:1 David's lament is the most poignant in all the Old Testament writings. Would God I had died for you, Absalom my son, my son. It reveals David's deep love for his son in spite of his treachery and rebellion. 19:3-9 David's grief for his son delays his return to the city, though the people begin returning on their own. Job is politically and militarily astute. He implores David to return for the sake of his kingship. David sits in the gate, but Israel has fled to its tents. The tension between Judah and Israel is quite evident once more. 19:10-15 Israel evidences a willingness to have David as king once more, though they have been in rebellion. By giving Amasa the post of commander of the army, David seeks not only to cement an alliance with the northern tribes but to repay Job for his killing of Absalom. This is the post Amasa held under Absalom. 19:16-23 Shimei rushes to curry favor with the king, see 16:5-14, helping ferry the king's household across the river Jordan along with Ziba. He begs for the king's forgiveness, and the king seems to forgive him. David admits he is not sure if he is king again over Israel. David's mercy to Barzillai. And Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Roglim and went across the river Jordan, with the king to escort him across the Jordan. Now Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old, and had provided the king with supplies while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very great man. And the king said to Barzillai, "Come across with me, and I will provide for your old age in Jerusalem." But Barzillai said to the king, "How long have I to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am 80 years old today. Can I discern between the good and bad? Can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any longer the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be a further burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go a little way across the Jordan with the king. Why should the king repay me with such a reward? Let me your servant remain, and die in my own city near the grave of my father and mother. But here is your servant Chimham, he will cross over with my lord the king, and do for him what seems good to you." And the king answered, "Chimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him what seems good to you. Now I will do for you whatever you ask of me." Then all the people went over the Jordan, and the king crossed. And the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him. And he returned to his place. The debate at Gilgal. Now the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him. And all the people of Judah escorted the king, and half the people of Israel. And behold, all the men of Israel came to the king and said to him, "Why did our brethren, the men of Judah, steal you away and bring the king, his household, and all David's men with him across the Jordan?" So all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, "Because the king is a close relative of ours. Why then are you angry over this matter? Have we ever eaten at the king's expense? Or has he given us any gift? And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, We have 10 shares in the king, therefore we are first over you, and we also have a greater right to David than you. Why then do you despise us? Were we not the first to advise bringing back our king? The words of the men of Judah were sharper than the words of the men of Israel. Rebellion of Sheba. There happened to be there a rebel whose name was Sheba the son of Bichri, a Benjamite. And he blew a trumpet and said, We have no share in David, nor do we have inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to your tents, O Israel. So every man of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah, from the Jordan as far as Jerusalem, clung to their king. Now David entered his house at Jerusalem. And the king took the 10 women, his concubines whom he had left to keep the house, and put them under guard and supported them, but did not go into them. So they were shut up to the day of their death, living in widowhood. And the king said to Amasa, Within 3 days, call the men of Judah for me, and be present here yourself. So Amasa went to call for the men of Judah. But he delayed longer than the time set by David, who appointed him. And David said to Abishai, Now Sheba the son of Bichri will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants with you and pursue him so that he does not fortify cities for himself and escape from our sight. So Job's men with the Cherethites, the Pelethites, and all the mighty men went out after him. They went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba the son of Bichri. When they reached the large stone in Gibeon, Amasa came before them. Now Job was dressed in battle armor, and on it was a belt with a sword fastened in its sheath at his hips. Then the sword came out and fell to the ground. Then Job said to Amasa, Are you healthy, brother? And Job took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa did not notice the sword that was in Job's hand. And he struck him with it in the stomach, and his entrails poured out on the ground. He did not strike him again, and he died. Then Job and Abishai his brother pursued Sheba the son of Bichri. Meanwhile one of Job's servants stood near him and said, Whoever favors Job and whoever is for David, follow Job. But Amasa was soaked in his blood in the middle of the road. And when the man saw that all the people stood still, he removed Amasa from the path onto the field. He threw a garment over him because he saw that everyone halted who came upon him. And when he was removed from the road, all the people followed after Job to pursue Sheba the son of Bichri. And he went through all the tribes of Israel to Abel and Beth Maachah, and all the Charites. So they joined together and went after Sheba. They then came and besieged Sheba in Abel and Beth Maachah. And they raised a siege mound against the city, and stood by the rampart. And all the people with Job considered pulling down the wall. Then a wise woman cried out from the wall, Listen! Listen! Tell Job to come near, and I will speak with him. When he came near to her, the woman said, Are you Job? He answered, I am. Then she said to him, Hear the words of your handmaid. And he replied, I am listening. So she spoke, saying, In former times they used to say, They asked at Abel and in Dan whether the things established by the faithful of Israel failed, and they will ask in Abel whether they failed. I am among the peaceable and loyal in Israel. You seek to put a city and a capital in Israel to death. Why are you going to swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? And Job answered and said, Far be it from me, far be it from me to swallow it up or destroy it. That is not so. But a man from the mountains of Ephraim, Sheba the son of Bichri by name, raised his hand against King David. Deliver him only to me, and I will depart from the city. So the woman said to Job, Watch, his head will be thrown to you over the wall. Then the woman in her wisdom went to the people and spoke to all the city. And they cut off the head of Sheba the son of Bichri and threw it out to Job. Then he blew a trumpet, and they scattered from the city, every man to his tent. So Job returned to the king at Jerusalem. Notes from the previous page. 19:25-30 Mephibosheth comes to see David once he has returned to Jerusalem. He is unwashed and unshaven, as though in mourning. When David asks him why he did not flee with him, Mephibosheth says that his servant, Ziba, had deceived him, c. 16:1, 4. Who was lying? David seems to give Mephibosheth the benefit of the doubt. Ziba had certainly sought to benefit from having taken possession of Saul's property. 1932-38 Barzillai of Gilead, 80 years old, has previously supported David in Mahanaim, c. 17:27, 29, and is a representative of the tribes across Jordan. David offers to care for him in Jerusalem in return for his aid. Barzillai prefers to return to his city, by the tomb of his father and mother, but asks that David care for his servant, possibly his son, Chimham. 19:41-43 Tension between Judah and Israel mounts. The accusation, we have 10 shares in the king, therefore we are first over you, reflects the fact Judah was a latecomer to the confederacy, as well as that the northern tribes were more numerous. At this point, Judah prevails. 20:1, To every man to your tents, O Israel, c. 3 kilograms 12:16, is the rallying cry of the northern tribes at various times in Israel's history, reflecting the independence of nomadic life. There is not merely animosity between Benjamin and Judah, the houses of Saul and David, but between Judah and all the northern tribes. 20:3 David takes care not to have his concubines defiled again, nor does he resort to them himself, c. 16:21, 22. 20:4-10 David summons Amasa, the new commander, to muster troops of Judah within 3 days. But Amasa delays, and this concerns David, lest Sheba do more harm than Absalom. 20:11-13 Job resumes leadership of David's cause. 20:14-22 The search for Sheba leads them to a walled city, Abel and Beth Maachah. Siege is laid against it, meaning it would be destroyed along with its inhabitants. A wise woman entreats Job to spare the city, a mother city, implying that villages were dependent on it. The siege is lifted and Job returns to Jerusalem. David's officers. And Job was over all the army of Israel, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites, Adoram was in charge of revenue, Jehoshaphat the son of Ahilud was recorder, Sheva was scribe, Zadok and Abiathar were the priests, and Ira the Jerite was a priest of David. The descendants of Saul are killed. Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David inquired before the Lord. And the Lord said, In Saul and his unrighteous house there is wrongdoing, because of his bloodthirsty killings when he killed the Gibeonites. So King David called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not sons of Israel, but belonged to the remnant of the Amorites. The sons of Israel had sworn protection to them, but Saul had sought to kill them in his zeal for the sons of Israel and Judah. And David said to the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? And with what shall I make atonement so that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord?" And the Gibeonites said to him, "We will have no silver or gold from Saul or from his house, nor shall you kill any man in Israel for us." So he said, "What do you want me to do for you?" Then they answered the king, "As for the man who consumed us and pursued us, who deceived us to destroy us, let us blot him out from remaining in any of the territories of Israel. Let 7 men of his descendants be delivered to us, and we will hang them in broad daylight before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord chose." And the king said, "I will give them." But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the Lord's oath between David and Jonathan the son of Saul. So the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth, the 2 sons of Rizpah the daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul, and the 5 sons of Michal the daughter of Saul, whom she bore for Adriel the son of Barzillai the Meholathite, and he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites. They hanged them on the hill before the Lord. So they fell, all 7 together, and were put to death in the days of harvest, in the first days, in the beginning of barley harvest. Now Rizpah the daughter of Aiah took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock, from the beginning of barley harvest until the rains poured on them from heaven. And she did not allow the birds of the air to rest on them by day nor the beasts of the field by night. David was told what Rizpah the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done. And they were faint, and Dan, son of Joah from the offspring of the giants, overtook them. Then David went and took Saul's bones and the bones of Jonathan his son. He took them from the men of Jabesh Gilead, who stole them from the square of Bethshan where the Philistines put them, on the day the Philistines struck down Saul in Gilboa. So he brought up the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son from there, and they gathered the bones of those who were hanged. And they buried Saul's bones and the bones of Jonathan his son, and the bones of those who were hanged in the country of Benjamin, in Zelah beside the tomb of Kish his father. So they did everything the king commanded. And after that God